Imagine waking up, checking your phone, and finding a photo of yourself sleeping, taken from the foot of your bed at 3 a.m. Tonight, we have three true horror stories. From a solo camper trapped in a tent with a stranger breathing just inches away, to a glitch in reality involving a man in a wedding suit who followed his victims across an entire city. Check your locks. You are not alone. Welcome to Scary Whispers. Story 1. The Icy Breath of the Winter Forest. I went camping alone last winter with my dog Roscoe, and it's something I'll never do again. I had taken a few days off work and wanted to get away from people. I loaded my truck with my gear and drove up a long, narrow trail that cut deep into a state forest. The road was barely maintained, covered in packed snow and ice, and there were no other cars anywhere. After driving for almost an hour, I parked at a small pull-off that looked like it hadn't been used in a long time. From there, I hiked another 20 minutes with my pack and Roscoe until I reached a small clearing surrounded by thick trees. The snow was deep and untouched. There were no footprints or signs of anyone else being around recently. That was what I wanted. I set my pack down, cleared a spot for a tent, and let Roscoe wander around while I worked. Once the tent was ready, staked down hard because the ground was frozen, I built a small fire. I cooked a simple dinner and sat on a log eating while Roscoe lay near the fire. The woods were quiet in that deep winter way where sound feels almost non-existent. After I ate, Roscoe suddenly stood up and started barking toward the trees. It didn't concern me at first. Deer were everywhere out there. I told him to relax, and he sat back down. About 20 minutes later, Roscoe started barking again, louder this time. Then I heard it too, footsteps moving through the snow somewhere out in the woods. The steps stopped, then started again. Roscoe went from barking to growling, then suddenly went silent, staring straight ahead. That was when I felt uneasy. I followed his gaze and saw a shape at the edge of the tree line. Someone was standing there, half hidden in the darkness, just barely lit by the fire. I called out, saying that he scared me. The figure stepped forward slightly, enough for me to see that it was a man. He asked what I was doing out there that deep in the woods. His tone wasn't friendly. I told him I was just getting out into nature. He just stood there watching me. I could feel the situation turning wrong, so I told him calmly that I was armed. The man slightly laughed and said something about me threatening him instead of inviting him to join me, asking where my hospitality was. Then he turned and walked back into the darkness. I put out the fire carefully so no light would draw attention, crawled into my tent and sealed it up. I lay there listening to the extreme silence. After a while, Roscoe started growling again. Then I heard what he was growling at, footsteps in the snow. They came right up to the tent and stopped. Whoever it was just stood outside. I could hear subtle movement, like the shift of weight in the snow. I had my gun in my hand now. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I cocked the gun and said clearly that I had a gun and that whoever was there needed to leave now. There was silence for a few seconds. Then I heard footsteps again, moving away from the tent, slowly at first, then faster before disappearing into the woods. I didn't unzip the tent to look out. I stayed frozen for hours. When the sky finally began to lighten, I packed up as fast as I could at the crack of dawn. I never went back to that part of the woods again. Story 2. The Ghost in the Wedding Suit. July 4th weekend in 2025. I drove from Melbourne, Florida to Charleston, South Carolina to visit a good friend named Mark. He was staying in a house in the city, and I was spending the night downstairs on a couch by windows that faced another apartment building and a labyrinth of alleyways. The next day, we walked through the main Charleston market and came out near the docks. That's when we saw him, a man in a wedding suit shambling down the road near the water. He wore a crisp bow tie, clean dress shoes, and his suit looked freshly pressed. He had long black curly hair and a tan complexion. Yet this man moved alone with a slow, detached movement. He didn't notice us and seemed to be in his own world. Instinctively, I wanted to avoid him, so I grabbed Mark and we walked deeper into the city. A few streets later, on another busy stretch, we looked toward a shop and saw him again. That same man with the same shambling movement. Somehow he had caught up to us, even though there was no clear way he could have reached that spot without us seeing him. He was in a completely different part of the city, but moving exactly the same way. The next night, July 5th, was my last night in Charleston. The city was packed with crowds. We were walking through the main area filled with nightlife when a wave of people moved toward us. As this group approached, both Mark and I noticed something at the exact same moment. It was him, the same man in the same wedding suit, shambling in the middle of the crowd as if he had been placed there. He stood out instantly. Two people were walking right beside him, and he brushed between them without either of them reacting. He kept the same slow, unsettling pace while the entire crowd moved normally around him. He glanced at us for a brief second and then continued forward. We watched him move down the street until he disappeared into a darker side street. Later that night, we returned to the house. Mark went upstairs and I went downstairs to sleep. I shut the blinds and tried to settle in. At some point in the middle of the night, I woke up to a tap on the window. I froze. After a few moments, I forced myself to look. I lifted the blinds slightly and looked down the alley. At the far end, I saw the back of a man turning the corner. It was him again. Right before he disappeared, he looked back toward the window. I drove home to Florida on July 6th, and the image of him turning that corner has stayed with me ever since. Story 3. The photo taken while I slept. I never thought I would be the kind of person who double-checks door locks, but that changed after 1 week last winter. I live alone in a small house, and my routine is predictable. That routine is why it took me longer than it should have to realize something was wrong. It started with a noise around 2:30 in the morning on a Tuesday. A soft thump near the back of the house. I checked the back door, made sure it was locked, and went to bed. The next morning, I noticed the back door handle felt loose, like it had been twisted too hard. I made a mental note to fix it later. On Thursday morning, I woke up and noticed my phone was at 12% battery. The cable was still connected to the phone, but the charger was no longer connected to the outlet. I told myself I must have knocked it loose in my sleep, but the explanation didn't make sense because my phone was still on the nightstand. Around 3 o'clock the next morning, I heard slow thumps coming from the back of the house. The next day, I found muddy shoe prints on the floor near the back door. The footprints weren't clear, like someone tried to wipe them off. I also noticed faint scratch marks around the lock. I had the lock replaced that afternoon. That night, I pushed a chair under the back door handle and slept with my bedroom door locked. I woke up just before 4 a.m. to the sound of something tapping lightly on my bedroom door. It wasn't a knock. It sounded like someone testing the door with their fingertips. In the morning, the back door itself was unlocked. The new lock hadn't been damaged. It had just been turned. Someone had been inside my house while I was asleep and knew how to unlock the door from the inside. The police found no sign of forced entry. That night, I stayed awake with a kitchen knife on the table. Around 2 a.m., I heard something from the basement. The basement door just outside the kitchen was cracked open. I walked over, peeked through the crack, and saw the outline of someone standing at the bottom of the stairs. I slammed the door, sprinted to my car, and called 911. Police brought a man out of the house in handcuffs. He was barefoot and wearing dark clothes that looked like they had been slept in. Officers found food wrappers and a phone charger plugged into an outlet in the basement. He had been sleeping on the concrete using old insulation as padding. It was days later that I was going through my camera roll when I found a very disturbing picture. It was a picture of me in my bed sleeping, taken at 3:11 a.m. It was the same night I woke up to my phone being unplugged from the wall. The nightmare became real all over again. I was told that with this photo, he'd likely be facing additional charges. I'll never be able to go down into a basement alone at night again.